Hi, good morning. Welcome to Hikate's Crossing as we continue with the 10th insight. Okay, the Oracle deck I like working with at the moment is the Sacred Path cards. So let's have a look and see what card are we going to reflect on as I read through the next chapter of the 10th insight. So what card are we going to reflect on today? What message are we going to think about while we're doing this? Okay, the first thing we're going to look at here is number 43, giveaway ceremony, and it's all about releasing and letting go. Oh, interesting card, release and let it go. Let's have a look and see what it says in the book here. So number 43, let's have a look. Oops, towards the end, here we go. Aho, child of earth, do you know the secret of the giveaway? The more you release, the more you receive, for that is nature's way. Aho, child of earth, do you believe in reaping what you sow? A drop of wisdom will bring the truth, and you will truly know. The teaching. One of the most important ceremonies in Native American teachings is the giveaway or potlatch ceremony. In this ritual, giving away of useful or loved possessions is a form of sharing with others. It is also a sign that the giver is willing to make a sacrifice and surrender a gift to another person without attachment or regret. The native understanding of sacrifice originally meant to make sacred. To make any act or any gift sacred, one has to complete that action with a joyful heart and a humble attitude. Giving is only one step of the process and allows the giver to look within, so that he or she may examine the growth potential associated with the giveaway. Many years ago, the Tlingit Indians of the Northwest, the Raven Clan and the Eagle Clan, held potlatch ceremonies. These clans would gather all they could to give those in need. Each time the potlatch was held, the clan on the giving end would distribute an even greater amount of goods than had received at a previous potlatch in order to show their appreciation. Unfortunately, in the early 1900s, the US government put a stop to this ritual. The government believed that the potlatches were getting out of hand because people were giving too much away. The government agents could not conceive of how people who were seemingly poor could take what little they had and give it to others, then live with practically nothing. These agents thought the potlatch ceremony was a kind of competition that brought shame and poverty to the people, but this was far from the truth. In Native tradition, no one is ever abandoned, orphaned, or left without food, dwellings, or help. The understanding among Native peoples is that when one shares all that one has in order that the people may live, honour, and abundance is brought to the giver. Indians have extended families who adopt many relatives and care for one another. Those who are blessed with possessions and food have always shared with those who are lacking. The medicine wheel may turn tomorrow, and the ones who are in need today may be blessed with abundance that they may share. The purpose of the giveaway sharing, the lessons connected to this ceremony teach the people how to release possessions and to let go of the ideas of importance connected with those belongings. The more prized the possession and the greater the sense of ownership, the more potent the lesson. The giveaway ceremony is never used to get rid of belongings that are no longer functional or badly in need of repair. Some gifts of the giveaway may be made especially for the occasion. To give cast-off items is a disgrace to the giver and shows a lack of respect for the receiver. If one cannot give without strings attached, there is no true release, and the sacredness of giving without expectations has been destroyed. The idea of envy and coveting the possessions of another was an alien concept before the invasion of the Turtle Island by the White Eyes. Among the tribes of Native America, if anyone was not taken care of, the people lost face. There was never any justification for some to live in luxury while others of the same tribe starved. In Native tradition, a gift is never thought of as an obligation or used as a mean of controlling the person who receives the gift. The obligatory giving concept came with the boat people whose ideas were based in European thought, which was that if a person gave a gift, the giver expected something in return. When this manner of giving is experienced, there is no true giveaway or release. When the attachment to material possessions is strong in a person, the favour given to others are heavily laden with expectations or demands. The red race knows that giving is a way of releasing. the people's spirit from the attachment to the physical world. In releasing possessions we love dearly, we are able to open our lives for future abundance. Wealth is measured in many different ways by two-leggeds across our planet. In native tradition, one important measure of wealth is a person's ability to assist others, develop talents, and the willingness to use them to aid those in need, set a person apart from others who seek self-gratification. This type of individual is the symbol of a potential leader in a tribe. Selflessness is a sign that the giving individual is able to stand apart from the attachments of the physical world. The spiritual life of this person is usually well developed and carries the medicine of the ancestors. The concept of Indian giving came from a misunderstanding when a boat person received a giveaway, and the Indian who gave the gift later reclaimed it. This manner of taking back a gift is done for a reason. If any item is given to someone who has no use for it, the giver has the right to reclaim the gift and give it to another who will use it. Every substance in our world has a role in creation. We two-leggeds have the ability to assist every part of creation by honouring the particular missions of each one, allowing them to be used. If a clay pot sits on a shelf and is not used, the mission of that pot has not been honoured and sacred, as therefore should be passed to someone who will allow it to complete its mission of service. When anything is made by human hands, the medicine of the maker is part of the object created. To wantonly destroy the object would be to dishonour the medicine of the maker along with that tool's ability to be of use. The ancestors say that if an object is carelessly broken by a human, the spirit of that object has been killed. To make fun of, criticise, or break anything that another has created is to dishonour oneself. The idea that gifts should be used to their fullest potential has sustained the red race for centuries. In this manner, everyone acknowledges the gifts Great Mystery gives through the field of plenty, as well as the purpose of not accumulating more than one can personally use. The teachings of the giveaway are basic to native understanding. Many other lessons are learnt each time one has the opportunity to share and is faced with personal feelings that arise when a decision to give away is made. As we free ourselves from the need to give with strings attached or the regret that sometimes follows, we are able to release our spirits and allow them to soar beyond the limited understanding of our former selves. The application. The giveaway card spells relief through release. Don't get stuck holding on to anything that no longer serves you. Associates, ideas, habits, and belongings may need to go at this time. Attachment to attitudes like needing to be needed or liked may no longer serve either. You're being asked to share what you can, give away something that can help someone else, or just let go. Don't hold on so tight. The natural flow of life is squelched when you insist on total control. In all cases, the giveaway card tells us to release any bond that makes us captives of our own creation. In so doing, we can spread our wings and fly. Remember that generosity is a talent and a virtue that comes from dropping the fear of scarcity and from trusting Great Mystery. Okay, so let's continue with the 10th insight. Whew, taking a nice deep breath as we think about releasing and letting go. It's called Remembering the Future. Okay, take a nice deep breath. We knelt at the top of the hill and looked carefully down at the base of the larger ridge. I could see nothing out of the ordinary in the fading light. No movement, no guards. The hum which had persisted for the most of the 40-minute walk had now completely disappeared. "Are you sure we're at the right place?" I asked Curtis. "Yes," he said. "Do you see the 4 large boulders about 50 feet up the slope? The doorway is right beneath them, hidden in the bushes. To the right you can just make out the top of the projection dish. It looks functional again." "I see it," Maya said. "Where are the guards?" I asked Curtis. "Maybe they've abandoned the site." We observed the doorway for almost an hour, waiting for signs of activity, hesitant to move or talk much until darkness had fallen across the valley. Suddenly we heard movements behind us. Flashlights clicked on, flooding us in light, and 4 armed men rushed in, demanding that we raise our hands. After spending 10 minutes going through our gear, they searched each of us, then moved the group down the hill and up to the bunker's entrance. The door of the bunker swung open and Feynman charged out loud and angry. "Are these the ones we've been looking for?" he shouted. "Where did you find them?" One of the guards explained what had happened as Feynman shook his head and stared at us through the beams of light. He walked closer and demanded, "What are you doing here?" "You've got to stop what you're doing," Curtis retorted. Feynman was struggling to recognize him. "Who are you?" The guard's flashlight settled, illuminating Curtis's face. "Curtis Weber." "I'll be damned," Feynman said. "You blew up our dish, didn't you?" "Listen to me," Curtis said. "You know this generator is too dangerous to operate at these levels. You could ruin this entire valley." "You were always an alarmist, Weber. That's why we let you go at Deltic. I've been working on this project for far too long to give up this point. It's going to work exactly as I planned." "But why are you taking the chance? Concentrate on the smaller house-size units. Why are you trying to increase the output so much?" "That's none of your business. You need to keep quiet." Curtis edged towards him. "You want to centralize the generating process so you can control it. That's not right." Feynman smiled. "A new energy system has to be phased in. Do you think we can go overnight from energy being a substantial part of household and business costs to practically nothing? The sudden disposable income throughout the world would cause hyperinflation and probably a massive reaction that would cast us into a depression." "You know that's not true," Curtis replied. "Reduced energy costs would increase the efficiency of production tremendously, supplying more goods at lower costs. No inflation would occur. You're doing this for yourself. You want to centralize the production so that you can control its availability and price, despite the dangers." He stared angrily at Curtis. "You're so naive. Do you think that the interests that act to control energy prices now would allow a sudden massive shift to an inexpensive source? Of course not. It has to be centralized and packaged to work at all. And I'm going to be known for having done this. It's what I was born to do." "That's not true," I blurted. "You were born to do something else, to help us." Feynman swung around to face me. "Shut up! Do you hear me? All of you!" His eyes found Charlene. "What happened to the man I sent with you?" Charlene looked away without responding. "I don't have time for this," Feynman was shouting again. "I'd suggest you worry about your personal safety right now." He paused to look us over, then shook his head and walked to one of the armed men. "Keep them here in this group until this is over. All we need is another hour. They try to escape. Shoot them!" The operative spoke briefly to the other three, and they formed a perimeter, encircling us at a distance of about 30 feet. "Sit down," one of them said. We sat facing each other in the darkness. Our energy was totally deflated. There'd been no signs of the soul group since we'd left the cave. "What do you think we should do?" I asked Charlene. "Nothing's changed," she whispered. "We've got to build our energy again." The darkness was now almost totally broken only by the operative's light sweeping back and forth across the group. I could barely make out the outlines of the faces, each, though we were sitting in a tight circle 8 feet apart. "We have to try to escape," Curtis whispered. "I think they will kill us." Then I remembered the image I'd seen in Feynman's birth vision. He envisioned being with us in the woods in the dark. I knew there was also another landmark in the scene, but I couldn't remember what it was. "No," I said. "I think we need to try again here." At the moment, the air was filled with high-pitched sound, a sound similar to the hum, but again more in harmony, almost pleasing to the ear. Again, a perceptible shimmer swept through the ground under our bodies. "We have to increase our energy now," Maya whispered. "I don't know if I can do it here," Curtis responded. "You have to," I said. "Focus on each other the way we did before," Maya added. I tried to screen out the ominous scene around us and return to an inner state of love, ignoring the shadows and the flickering beams of light. I focused on the beauty of the faces. Focus on each other, the way we did before," Maya added. I tried to screen out the ominous scene around us and return to an inner state of love, ignoring the shadows and the flickering beams of light. I focused on the beauty of the faces in the circle. As I struggled to locate the other's higher self-expression, I began to notice a shift in the light pattern around us. Gradually I could see every face and expression very clearly, as though I was looking through an infrared viewer. "What do we visualize?" Curtis asked in desperation. "We have to get back to our birth visions," Maya said. "Remember why we came." Suddenly the ground shook violently, and the sound from the experiment again took on a dissonant, grating quality. We moved closer together, and our collective thought seemed to project the image of fighting back. We knew that somehow we could marshal our forces and push back the negative and destructive attempts of the experiment. I even picked up a picture of Feynman being pushed backward, his equipment blowing up and burning, his men fleeing in terror. Another surge in the noise disrupted my focus. The experiment was continuing. 50 feet away, a huge pine tree snapped in half and thundered to the ground with a ripping sound and a cloud of dust. A fissure 5 feet wide opened up between us and the guard on the right. He reeled back in horror, the beam of his flashlight swinging wild in the screen. "This isn't working," Maya screamed. "This isn't working!" Another tree crashed to the ground on our left as the earth slid 4 or 5 feet, knocking us flat. Maya looked horrified and jumped to her feet. "I've got to get away from here," she yelled, then began to run north into the darkness. The guard on that side, lying where he had been thrown by the earth's movement, rolled to his knee and caused her form in the beam of the flashlight, then raised his gun. "No, wait!" I screamed. As she ran, Maya looked back, spotting the guard, who was now aiming directly at her, preparing to fire. The scene seemed to shift into slow motion, and as the gun discharged, every line in her face revealed an awareness that she was about to die. But instead of the bullets ripping into her side and back, a wisp of white light darted in front of her, and the bullets bore no effect. She hesitated momentarily, then disappeared into the darkness. At that same time, sensing the opportunity, Charlene leaped up from her position to my right and ran to the northeast, into the dust, her movement unnoticed by the guards. I started to run, but the guard who had fired at Maya turned his weapon toward me. Quickly, Curtis reached out and grabbed my legs, dragging me to the ground. Behind us, the bunker door swung open, and Feynman ran up the dish antenna and furiously adjusted the keyboard. Gradually, the noise began to diminish, and the earth movement slowed to mere tremors. "For God's sake," Curtis yelled toward him, "you've got to stop this!" Feynman's face was covered with dust. "There's nothing wrong that we can't fix," he said with an eerie calm. "There's nothing wrong that we can't fix," he said with an eerie calm. The guards were on their feet, dusting themselves off and walking towards us. Feynman noticed that Maya and Charlene were missing. But before he could say anything, the noise returned with ear-shattering volume, and the earth under us seemed to leap upward several feet, rolling everyone to the guard once more. The splintering limbs from a falling tree sent the guard scurrying towards the bunker. "Now," Curtis said, "let's go." I was frozen. He jerked me to my feet. "We've got to move," he yelled in my ear. Finally my legs worked, and we ran northeast in the same direction that Maya had fled. Several more tremors reverberated under our feet, and then the movements and sounds ceased. After making our way through the dark woods for several miles, our path lighted only by the rays of the moon filtering through the foliage, we stopped and huddled in a grove of small pines. "Do you think they'll follow us?" I asked Curtis. "Yes," he said. "They can't allow any of us to get back to town. I would guess that they still have people stationed along the paths back." While he was talking, a clear picture of the falls entered my mind. It was pristine, undisturbed. The falling water, I realised, was the landmark in Freya's vision that I had been trying to remember. "We have to go northwest to the falls," I said. Curtis nodded towards the north, and as silently as possible we headed in that direction, crossing the stream and carefully making our way towards the canyon. Periodically, Curtis would stop and cover our tracks. During a rest we could hear the low rumbling of vehicles from the southeast. After another mile we began to see the moonlit canyon walls rising up into the distance. As we approached the rocky mouth, Curtis led the way across the creek. Suddenly he jumped backward as in fright as someone walked around a tree from the left. The person screamed and recoiled, almost losing balance, teetering at the edge of the creek bank. "Maya!" I yelled, realizing who it was. Curtis recovered and lunged forward and pulled her back as the rocks and gravel slid into the water. She hugged him intensely and then reached out to me. I don't know why I ran like that. I just panicked. I could only think to head towards the falls you told me about. I just prayed that some of you would get away too. Leaning back against a larger tree, she took a deep breath, then asked, what happened when the guard fired back there? How did those bullets miss me? I saw the strange streak of light. Curtis and I looked at each other. I don't know, I said. It seemed to calm me, Maya continued, in a way I've never experienced before. We looked at each other, no one spoke. Then in silence, I heard the distant sound of someone walking up ahead. Wait, I said to the others. Someone's up there. We crouched down and waited. 10 minutes went by. Then from the trees ahead, Charlene walked up and dropped to her knees. Thank God I found you, she said. How did you get away? We were able to run when a tree fell, I said. Charlene looked deep into my eyes. The thought you might head towards the falls, so I walked in this direction, although I don't know if I could have found them in the dark. Maya motioned for us, and we all moved out to a clearing where the creek went through the mouth of the canyon. Here the full light of the moon illuminated the grass and the rocks to each side. Maybe we're going to have another chance, she said, urging us with her hands to sit down and face each other. What are we going to do? Curtis said. We can't stay here long, they'll be coming. I looked at Maya, thinking we should go on to the falls, but she seemed so energized that instead I asked, what do you think went wrong before? I don't know. Maybe there are too few of us. You said there were supposed to be 7. Or perhaps there's too much fear. Charlene leaned towards the group. I think we have to remember the energy we achieved when we were in the cave. We have to connect at that level again. For several long minutes we all worked on our inner connection. Finally, Maya said, we have to give each other energy, find the higher self-expression. I took several deep breaths and watched the faces of the others again. Gradually they became more beautiful and luminescent, and I caught sight of their authentic soul expression. Around us, the surrounding plants and rocks lit up even more, as though the moon's rays had suddenly doubled. A familiar wave of love and euphoria swept through my body, and I turned to see the shimmering figures of my soul group behind me. As soon as I saw them, and my awareness seemed to expand even more, and I realized that the soul groups of the others were in similar positions, or they had not yet merged. Maya caught my eye. She was looking at me in a state of complete openness and honesty, and as I watched her, it seemed as though I could see her birth vision as a subtle expression on her face. She knew who she was, and it beamed outward for everyone to observe. Her mission was clear. Her background had prepared her perfectly. Feel as if the atoms in your body are vibrating at a high level, she said. I glanced at Charlene. On her face was the same clarity. She represented the information bearers, identifying and communicating the vital truth expressed by each person or group. Do you see what's happening? Charlene asked. We're seeing each other as we really are, at our highest level, without the emotional projections of old fears. I can see that, Curtis said, his face again full of energy and certainty. No one spoke for several minutes. I closed my eyes as the energy continued to build. Look at that, Charlene suddenly said, pointing at the soul groups all around us. Each soul group was beginning to blend with the others, just as they had done at the cave. I glanced at Charlene and then at Curtis and Maya. I could now see on their faces an even fuller expression of who they were as participants in the long movement of human civilization. This is it, I said. We're reaching the next step. We're seeing a more complete vision of human history. Before us, in a huge hologram, appeared an image of history that seemed to stretch out from the very beginning to what appeared to be a distant end. As I strained to focus, I realized that this was an image very similar to the one I'd observed earlier while with my soul group, except that in this instance the story was beginning much earlier, with the birth of the universe itself. We watched as the first matter exploded into being, and gravitated into stars that lived and died, and spewed forth the great diversity of elements that ultimately formed the earth. These elements in turn combined in the early terrestrial environment into ever more complex substances until they finally leaped in organic life that then almost moved forward into greater organization and awareness, as if guided by an overall plan. Multi-celled organisms became fish, and fishes progressed into amphibians, and amphibians evolved into reptiles and birds, and ultimately into mammals. As we watched, a clear picture of the afterlife dimension opened up in front of us, and I understood that an aspect of each of the souls there, in fact, a part of all of humanity, had lived through this long, slow process of evolution. We had swum as fishes, boldly crawled upon the land as amphibians, and struggled to survive as reptiles, birds, and mammals, fighting every step of the way to finally move into human form, all with intention. We knew that through wave after wave of successive generations, we would be born into the physical plane, and no matter how long it took, we would strive to wake up and unify and evolve and eventually implement on earth the same spiritual culture that exists in the afterlife. Certainly the journey would be difficult, even torturous. With the first intuition to awaken, we would sense the fear of aloneness and separation. Yet we would not go back to sleep. We would fight through the fear, relying on the dim intuition that we weren't alone, that we were spiritual beings with a spiritual purpose on the planet. And following the urge of evolution, we would gravitate together into larger, more complex social groupings, differentiating into more diverse occupations, overcoming a need to defeat and conquer each other, and eventually implement a democratic process through which new ideas could be shared and synthesized and evolved into ever better truth. Gradually our security would come from inside us as we progress from an expression of the divine. In terms of nature gods, the divine is one Father. God outside ourselves to a final expression as the Holy Spirit within. Sacred texts would be intuited and written, offering heartfelt symbolic expression of our relationship and future with this one deity. Visionaries from both East and West would clarify that this Holy Spirit was always there, always accessible, waiting only for our ability to repent, to open, to clear the blocks that prevent a full communion. Over time, we knew our urge to unify and share would expand until we sensed a special community, a deeper association with others who shared a particular geographical location on the planet, and the human world would begin to solidify into political nation-states, each holding a unique viewpoint. Soon after would come an explosion of trade and commerce. The scientific method would be instituted, and the resulting discoveries would initiate a period of economic preoccupation, and the greatest secular expansion known as the Industrial Revolution. At once we developed a web of economic relationships around the globe. We would begin to further awaken and to remember our full spiritual nature. The insights would gradually permeate human consciousness, and we would evolve our economy into a form compatible with the earth, and finally begin to move beyond the last fearful polarization of forces towards a new spiritual worldview on the planet. Here I momentarily glanced at the others. Their faces told me that they had shared this vision of Earth's history. In one brief revelation, we had grasped how human consciousness had progressed from the beginning of time right to the present moment. Suddenly the hologram focused on the polarization in great detail. All humans on the earth were migrating into two conflicting positions, one pushing towards a vague but ever clearer image of transformation, and the other resisting, sensing that important values contained in the old worldview were being lost forever. We could see that in the afterlife dimension, it was known that this conflict would be our greatest challenge to the spiritualization of the physical dimension, particularly if the polarization grew extreme. In this case, both sides would entrench into an irrational projection of evil onto the other, or worse, might believe the literal interpreters of the end times prophecies and begin to think the coming future was beyond their influence, and therefore give up completely. To find the world vision and resolve the polarization, we could see that our afterlife intention was to discern the deeper truths of these prophecies. As with all scriptures, the visions in Daniel and Revelation were divine intuitions coming from the afterlife into the physical plane, and so must be understood as draped in the symbolism of the seer's mind, much like a dream. We would focus on the symbolic meaning, the prophecies envisioned, an eventual end to the human story on earth, but an end that for believers would be quite different from the one experienced by non-believers. Those in the latter group were seen to experience an end of history, that would begin with great catastrophes and environmental disasters and collapsing economies. Then at the height of the fear and chaos, a strong leader would emerge, the Antichrist, who would offer to restore order, but only if individuals would agree to give up their liberties and carry the mark of the beast upon their bodies in order to participate in the automated economy. Eventually, the strong leader would declare himself a god and take by force any country that resisted his rule, at first making war on the forces of Islam, then on the Jews and Christians, ultimately casting the whole world into a fiery Armageddon. For believers, on the other hand, the scriptural prophets predicted a much more pleasant end to history. Remaining true to spirit, these believers would be given spiritual bodies and be raptured into another dimension called the New Jerusalem, but would be able to go back and forth into the physical. Eventually, at a certain point in the war, God would fully return to end the fighting, restore the earth, and implement 1,000 years of peace, where there would be no sickness or death, and everything would be transformed, even the animals of the world who would no longer eat meat. Instead, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. Maya and Curtis caught my eye. Then Charlene looked up. We all seemed to sense at once the core meaning of the prophecies. What the end time seers were receiving was an intuition that in our time, two distinctive futures would be opening before us. We could choose either to languish in the fear, believing that a world is moving into a Big Brother style of automation and social decay and ultimate destruction, or we could follow the other path and consider ourselves the believers who can overcome this nihilism and open to the high vibrations of love, where we are spared the apocalypse and can enter a new dimension in which we invite the Spirit through us to create just the utopia the scriptural prophets envisioned. Now we could see why those in the afterlife felt that our interruption of these prophecies was key to resolving the polarization. If we decide that these scriptures meant that the destruction of the world was inevitable, written unalterably into God's plan, the effect of such a belief would be to create this very outcome. Clearly we had to choose the path of love and believing. As I had seen earlier, the polarization was not intended to be so severe. It was known in the afterlife that each side represented part of the truth that could be integrated and synthesized into the new spiritual worldview. Further, I saw that this synthesis would be a natural outgrowth of the insights themselves, specifically the 10th insight, and of the special groups that would begin to form all over the world. Suddenly the hologram raced forward, and I felt another expansion of consciousness. I knew that we were now moving into the next step of the process, the actual remembrance of how we intended to become believers and accomplish this prophesied utopian future. We were finally remembering the world vision. As we watched, we first saw the 10th insight groups forming all over the planet, reaching a critical mass of energy, and then learning to project this energy in such a way that the entrenched sides of the polarization immediately began to lighten and ease, overcoming the fear. Especially affected would be the technological controllers, who would remember themselves and give up their last efforts to manipulate the economy and seize power. The result of the projected energy would be an unprecedented wave of awakening and remembrance and cooperation and personal involvement, and a virtual explosion of newly inspired individuals, all of whom would begin to fully recall their birth visions and follow their syncretic path into exactly the right positions within their culture. The scene shifted to images of decaying inner cities and forgotten rural families. Here we could see a new consensus forming on how to intervene in the cycle of poverty. No longer would intervention be conceived in terms of government programs or merely in terms of education and jobs. The new approach would be deeply spiritual, for the structures of education were already in place. What was missing was the ability to break free from the fear and to overcome the hellish diversions set up to ward off the anxiety of poverty. In this regard, I saw a sudden surge of private outreach surrounding each family and each child in need. Waves of individuals began to form personal relationships, beginning with those who saw the family every day. Merchants, teachers, police officers on the beat, ministers. This contact was then expanded by other volunteers working as big brothers, big sisters, and tutors, all guided by their inner intuitions to help, remembering their intentions to make a difference with one family One child, after all, carrying the contagion of the insights and the crucial message that no matter how tough the situation or how entrenched the self-defeating habits, each of us can wake up to a memory of mission and purpose. As this contagion continued, incidents of violent crime began mysteriously to decrease across human culture. For as we saw clearly, the roots of violence are always frustration and passion, and fear scripts that dehumanize the victim, and a growing interaction with those carrying a higher awareness was now beginning to disrupt this mindset. We saw a new consensus emerging towards crime that drew from both traditional and human potential ideas. In the short run, there would be a need for new prisons and detention facilities, as the traditional truth was recognised that returning offenders to the community too soon, or leniently letting perpetrators go in order to give them another chance, reinforced the behaviour. Yet at the same time, we saw an integration of the insights into the actual operation of these facilities, introducing a wave of private involvement with those incarcerated, shifting the crime culture, initiating the only rehabilitation that works, the contagion of remembering. Simultaneously, as increasingly more people awakened, I saw millions of individuals taking the time to intervene in conflict as every level of human culture, for we all were reaching a new understanding of what was at stake. In every situation where a husband or wife grew angry and lashed out at the other, or wore addictive compulsions or a desperate need for approval, led a youthful gang member to kill, or where people felt so restricted in their lives that they were embezzled or defrauded or manipulated others for gain. In all of these situations, there was someone perfectly placed to have prevented the violence, but who had failed to act. Surrounding this potential hero were perhaps dozens of other friends and acquaintances who had likewise failed, because they didn't convey the information ideas that would have created the wider support system for the intervention to have taken place. In the past, perhaps this failure could have been rationalized, but no longer. Now the 10th insight was emerging, and we knew that people in our lives were probably souls with whom we had long relationships over many lifetimes, and who were now counting on our help. So we are compelled to act, compelled to be courageous. None of us wants to have failure on our conscience, or have to bear a torturous life review in which we must watch the tragic consequences of our timidity. As the scenes rushed past, we saw this beginning awareness motivating activity towards other social problems as well. We could see an image of the world's rivers and oceans. And again, I observed a synthesis of the old and new, which, while admitting the often capricious behaviour of government bureaucracy, also raised to a new level of priority the human desire to safeguard the environment, initiating a surge of private intervention. The wisdom was emerging that, as with the problem of poverty and violence, the crime, the pollution always has compliant bystanders. People who would never consciously pollute the environment themselves worked with or knew about others whose projects or business practices damage the planet's biosphere. Those were the people in the past who had said nothing, perhaps because of job insecurity or because they felt alone in their opinion. Yet now, as they awakened and realized they were in exactly the right position to take action, we watched them rally public opinion against the polluters, whether it was the dumping of industrial wastes into the ocean at the dead of night, venting excess oil from a tanker far at sea, secretly using banned insecticides on commercial vegetable plots, leaving the scrubbers off at an industrial plant between inspections, or faking the research on the dangers of a new chemical. No matter what crime, now there would be inspired witnesses who would feel the support of grassroots organisations offering rewards for such information, and who would take their camcorders and expose the crimes themselves. Similarly, we observed the environmental practices of governments themselves being exposed, especially regarding policies towards public lands. For years it would be discovered governmental agencies had sold mining and logging rights on some of the most sacred places on earth at below market rates, as political favours and paybacks. Majestic cathedrals, forests belonging to the public had been unbelievably pillaged and clear-cut in the name of proper forest management, as though planting rows of pine trees would replace the diversity of life and energies inherent in hardwood forests that had matured for centuries. Yet it would be the emerging spiritual awareness that would finally force an end to such disgrace. We watched a new coalition forming, made up of old view hunters and nostalgic history buffs, and those who perceive the natural sites as sacred portals. This coalition would finally sound the alarm that would save the few remaining virgin forests in Europe and North America, and begin to protect on a larger scale the essential rainforests in the tropical regions of the world. It would be commonly understood that every remaining site of beauty must be saved for the benefit of the future generations. Cultivated plant fibres would replace the use of tree for lumber and paper, and the remaining public land would all be protected from exploitation and used to supply the exploding demand to visit such unspoiled and energizing areas of nature. At the same time as intuition and awareness and remembering expanded, the developed cultures would finally turn to the native peoples of the world with a new respect and appreciation, eager to integrate a mystical redefinition of the natural world. The holographic scene moved forward again, and I could see the wave of spiritual contagion permeating every aspect of culture. Just as Charlene had foreseen earlier, every occupational group was beginning consciously to shift its customary practice towards a more intuitive and ideal level of functioning, finding its spiritual role, its vision of true service. Medicine led by individual practitioners who focused on the spiritual psychological genesis of disease was moving from the mechanical treatment of symptoms towards prevention. We could see the legal profession moving from the self-serving methods of creating conflict and obscuring truth in order to win into its true role of resolving conflict in the most win-win manner possible. And just as Curtis had seen everyone involved in business, industry by industry, was shifting into an enlightened capitalism, a capitalism orientated not just to profits, but to filling the evolving needs of spiritual beings, and making these products available at the lowest possible prices. The new business ethic would produce a grassroots deflation, initiating a systematic evolution towards an eventual full automation and ultimately the free availability of the basic necessities of life, liberating humans to engage in the spiritual economy envisioned in the ninth insight. As we continued to watch, the scenes accelerated forward, as we could see individuals remembering their spiritual missions at increasingly younger ages. Here we could see the precise understanding that would soon embody the new spiritual worldview. Individuals would come of age and remember themselves as souls born from one dimension of existence into another. Although memory loss during the transition would be expected, recapturing pre-life memory would become an important early goal of education. As youth, our teachers would first guide us through early experience of synchronicity, urge us to identify our intuitions, to study certain subjects, to visit particular places, always looking for higher answers as to why we were pursuing these particular paths. As the full memory of the insights emerged, we would find ourselves involved with certain groups, working on particular projects, bringing in our full vision of what we had wanted to do. And finally, we would recover the underlying intention behind our lives. We would know that we came here to raise the vibratory level of this planet, to discover and protect the beauty and energy of its natural sites, and to ensure that all humans had access to these special locations, so that we could continue to increase our energy, ultimately instituting the afterlife culture here in the physical. Such a worldview would specially shift the way we looked at other people. No longer would we see human beings merely in the racial, dress, or national origin of one particular lifetime. Instead, we would see others as brother or sister souls, engaged like us in the process of coming awake and of spiritualizing the planet. It would become known that the settling of certain souls into various geographical locations on the planet had occurred with great meaning. Each nation was, in fact, an enclave of specific spiritual information shared and modelled by its citizens, information waiting to be learnt and integrated. As I watched the future unfold, I could see that a world political unity envisioned by so many was finally being achieved, not by forcing all nations into a subservience to one political body, but rather through a grassroots not acknowledgement of our spiritual similarities, while treasuring our local autonomy and cultural differences. As with individuals interacting in a group, each member of the family of nations was being recognised for this culture truth represented to the world at large. Before us we saw Earth's political struggles, so often violent, shifting into a war of words. As a tide of remembrance continued to sweep the planet, all humans began to understand that our destiny was to discuss and compare the perspective of our relative religions, and while honouring the best of their individual doctrines at the personal level, ultimately to see that each religion supplemented the others, and to integrate them into a synthesized global spirituality. We could see clearly that these dialogues would result in the rebuilding of a grand temple in Jerusalem, jointly occupied by the major religions, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, Eastern, even the de facto religion of secular idealism, represented by those economic enclaves in China and Europe, who thought primarily in terms of a pacifistic economic utopia. Here, ultimate spiritual perspective would be debated and discussed, and in this war of words and energy, at first the Islamic and the Jewish perspectives would hold centre stage. Then the Christian perspective would be compared and integrated, along with the inner vision of the Eastern religions. We saw the awareness of humanity entering another level, with the collective human culture progressing from primarily the sharing of economic information through the syncretic exchange of spiritual truths. As this occurred, certain individuals and groups would begin to reach levels approaching that of the afterlife dimension, and would disappear to the larger majority remaining on Earth. These select groups would warp intentionally back into the other dimension, yet would learn to go back and forth, just as the ninth insight predicts and the scriptural prophets saw. Yet after this rapture began, those left on Earth would understand what was occurring and accept their role in remaining in the physical, knowing that they would soon follow. Now it was time for the secular idealists to proclaim their truths on the temple steps. At first, their energetic thrust in Jerusalem would come from Europe, with its primarily secular vision, with one strong leader proclaiming the spiritual importance of secular matters. This perspective would be met strongly by the determined otherworldly spiritualism of the Muslims and the Christians, but then this conflict of energy would be meditated and later synthesized into one of the inner spiritual emphasis of the Eastern perspective. By then the last attempts of the controllers who had once conspired to create a tyrannical society of chips and robots and forced compliance would have been won over by the contagion of awakening, and this last synthesis would open everyone to the final infusion of the Holy Spirit. We saw clearly that through this Middle Eastern dialogue of energy, integration, history had fulfilled the scriptural prophecies in a symbolic and verbal manner, avoiding the physical apocalypse expected by the literasts. Suddenly our focus shifted to the afterlife dimension, and here we could see with great clarity that our intention all along was not merely to create a new earth, but a new heaven as well. We watched as the effect of the world vision remembrance transformed not only the physical dimension, but also the afterlife. During the raptures on earth, the soul groups would also have been rapturing towards the physical, contemplating the transfer of energy into the expanded physical dimension. Here the full reality of what was happening in the hysterical process became apparent. From the beginning of time to our memory, as our memory opened, energy and knowledge had systematically moved from the afterlife dimension into the physical. At first, the soul groups in the afterlife had borne full responsibility for maintaining the intentions and envisioning the future, helping us to recall what we wanted to do, giving us energy. Then as consciousness on earth progressed and the population increased, the balance of energy and responsibility had slowly shifted towards the physical dimension, till at this point in history, when enough energy had shifted and the world vision was being remembered, the full power and responsibility for believing and creating the intended future will be shifting from the afterlife to the souls on earth to the newly forming groups to us. At this point we have to carry the intent, and that's why it now fell to us to resolve the polarization and to help shift the particular individuals right here in this valley who were still caught in the fear and who just felt justified in manipulating the economy for their own purpose, justified in seizing control of the future. At exactly the same time, all four of us glanced at each other in the darkness, the hologram still surrounding us, the soul group still merged in the background, glowing brightly. Then I noticed a huge hawk fly onto a limb 10 feet above the group and gaze down at us. Beneath it, less than 5 feet away, a rabbit hopped to within 3 feet of my right elbow and stopped, followed seconds later by a bobcat who sat directly beside it. What was happening? Abruptly, a silent vibration tingled my solar plexus. The experiment had been reactivated. "Look over there," Curtis yelled. 50 yards away, barely distinguishable in the moonlight, was a narrow fissure, shaking the bushes and small trees, extending slowly in our direction. I looked at the others. "It's up to us now," Maya shouted. "We have enough of the vision now. We can stop them." Before we could act, the earth under us shook violently and the visher accelerated towards us. Simultaneously, several vehicles pulled to a stop in the underbrush, their lights shining through the fuzzy silhouettes made by the trees and dust. Unafraid, I maintained the energy and focused again on the hologram. "The vision will stop them," Maya yelled again. "Don't let the vision go! Hold it!" Embracing the image of the future before us, I again felt the group marshal energy towards Feynman, as if holding our intention like a giant wall against his intrusion. Imagining his group being pushed back by the energy, fleeing in terror, I glanced at the crevice still racing towards us, confident it would soon stop. It accelerated instead. Another tree fell, then another. As it sped into the group, I lost my concentration and rolled backwards, choking on the dust. "It's still not working," I heard Curtis yell. I felt as if it was happening again. "Up this way," I shouted, struggling to see in the sudden darkness. As I ran, I could barely make out the dim outlines of the others. They were veering away from me to the east. I climbed up the stony ridge that formed the left wall of the canyon, and didn't stop until I was 100 yards away, nearly into the rocks. I looked out into the night. Nothing moved, but I could hear Feynman's men talking at the canyon's entrance. Quietly, I made my way further up the slope, angling northwest, still watching carefully at the for any sign of the others. Finally, I found a way to climb down into the canyon floor again. Still no movement anywhere. Then as I began to walk north again, someone suddenly grabbed me from behind. "What?" I yelled. "Shh!" a voice whispered. "Be quiet. It's David." Okay, that's it for today. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care, and blessed be.